Hello, and thank you for continuing our discussion on the skeletal system with me today. Today we're going to talk skeletal organization and morphology. So how bones look and what we call those different terms along the way. So at the end of this, you're going to be able to identify bones in the axial and appendicular skeletons. We'll look at skeletal morphology by defining the parts of bones, and you're going to locate morphological differences in bones of the body. So here we go. First, so the human body has 206 bones. This number is slightly arbitrary because when we talk about sutures, if you have a suture here and a suture here, and they happen to fold out and connect here, or you have a little loop here that connects, this is technically a bone. It's just not a major bone, but it is technically a bone, so that would vary our 206 number. But you will be able to name the 206 primary bones of the body by the time we finish up. So to start with, your axial skeleton. We said your axial skeleton earlier contains your head, spine, your ribs and thoracic cage, and your pelvis. And your sacrum, sorry, not pelvis. But your axial skeleton contains the skull, which is composed of cranial and facial bones. Your hyoid bone is located in your neck. You can actually feel this if you stick your finger right above kind of your Adam's apple and swallow. You will feel your hyoid bone move. Your vertebral column is your vertebrae, which are fused, and they make a fused at the bottom, making the sacrum. And then your thoracic cage, your ribs and sternum, are all part of your axial skeleton. Your appendicular skeleton, your appendages, are everything else. Your pectoral girdle includes your clavicle and your scapula. Your upper limbs, so your arms, comprise of your humerus, your radius, and ulna, along with your carpals, which are your wrist bones, your metacarpals in your hand, and your phalanges are your fingers. Your pelvic girdle, so your pelvis, is part of the appendicular skeleton. And then your lower limbs, your legs, have your femur, your tibia, your fibula, your patella, your tarsals, your ankle bones. Metatarsals are your feet bones, and your phalanges are your toes. That is your divisions and the organization of your skeleton in that sense. So really quick, differentiate between your axial and appendicular skeletons. What's the difference between these two? And then give me a list of axial bones and appendicular bones. Doesn't be the entire list, but think of a couple that you can review with really quick. Now, each bone is made of different looking parts. It's got different sections. And so we give these all names because that's what we do, and why not? So you will need to know these names. I don't do a ton with definitions as far as assessment goes, but you have to be able to identify them. And if you know the definition, you know what they look like, you know what you're looking for, you can then identify them. So a condyle is a rounded process, usually articulating with another bone. So this is found at the head, or it's on the epiphyses of a bone, usually found articulating with another bone. A crest is a narrow ridge-like projection. So think of the crest being kind of like a peak. Your epicondyle, so epi means above, condyle refers to the rounded portion. So this is a projection above a condyle. So we'll look at the humerus, you can see those. But projection above a condyle, with above being the key word. And then a facet is a small, nearly flat surface. This allows for articulation. So the easiest place to see this is in your ribs, where your ribs and your vertebrae come together. And so here's a picture of each of them. So this is your femur. This is a condyle of the femur, so you see the bulb, the rounded portion. Over here, this piece on top is your, hold on, I was looking for a crest, not a ridge. A crest is here. This is your iliac crest on top. Your epicondyle here, so we have a condyle of the humerus right there, and then your epicondyle is going to be up above. And then my facets are these flat regions right here that are great for connecting to ribs. So those are those four terms. So really quick, what is a condyle? Where would you find one? What's a crest? Where would you find one? What's an epicondyle? Where would you find one? And what is a facet? And where would you find one? So pause this, answer those, and then hit play. We'll continue on. Your next three terms are fissure, fontanelle, and foramen, the three F's. A fissure is a groove. It usually allows nerves and blood vessels to pass through. An example would be your orbital fissure, which is found in your eye. A fontanelle is something that you don't have anymore, but these are soft spots in the skull where membranes cover the space between bones. This allows your brain to grow, your skull to grow. If you did not have these, your skull would be fused together, your brain would expand, and you would die because of the pressure created therein. So these are fontanelles. Foramen are holes. These are openings, these are holes that allow blood vessels, nerves, and ligaments to pass through. Great example is the foramen magnum, which is found in your skull. We're going to look at that multiple times this year. So the first one, fissure. This is a groove you see here that allows nerves and blood vessels to pass through into your eye. Your fontanelles are these cartilage pieces here on the skull that allow the different bones to expand and grow as your brain develops, which is a good thing. And then this is your foramen magnum, the big hole in your head that allows your spinal cord to pass through. So that's foramen, that's a hole. A fissure is a groove and not necessarily a hole. So that's the difference between those two. So really quick, what is a fissure? What are fontanelles and what is a foramen? Why do you have fontanelles and what do foramen do for you? Are your questions to answer. When you hit play, we'll go to the next slide. A couple more F's and then we'll continue on. So you have a fossa, not Mufasa, but a fossa, is a deep pit or depression. We're going to look at that. In your elbow, you have what's called an olecranon fossa. A fovea is a tiny pit or depression. So a small little inset we'll look at. You have the fovea capitis of the femur, which we're going to look at, and I'll practice and review with you as well. A head is an enlargement, so an expansion of a bone at the end. So this is where your epiphysis kind of expands out. We call that the head of the bone. So the head of the femur, head of the humerus are good examples. A meatus is similar to a foramen, but this is a tube-like passageway instead of just a hole. It's actually got a tube or a passageway through it. So this is a passageway within a bone. So for example, your ear canal is a meatus. It's called your auditory meatus of the ear. And so this top left picture, this is a fossa, which is a flat piece. This is your olecranon fossa. This little pit right here is called your fovea capitis. This is the little depression, essentially a mini fossa. It's called a fovea. My enlargement here, this big piece is called the head of the femur. This chunk here is called the neck, and we'll talk about these other pieces shortly after. Here's your ear canal. This is called your auditory meatus. So there's a passageway in here so that the sound waves travel where they're supposed to inside your body. Review questions. What's a fossa? What's a fovea? What is the head of a bone? And what is a meatus? And where do you have one? Couple more. Your next term is process. A process is a projection on a bone. You have a mastoid process of the skull. You also have a styloid process, which we'll talk about. So these are prominent projections that you can identify. A ramus is a branch or extension of the bone. So you have a ramus of the mandible, ramus of the jaw, which we're going to look at. The sinus, so you get sinus headaches, sinus infections. These are cavities or openings or spaces that aren't solid bone. They're actually filled with air. For example, you have a frontal sinus, which is found in your frontal bone, which is right on your forehead. And then your spine is a thorn-like projection. And so you have what's known as the spine of the scapula, which we are going to look at and discuss. So first we have a process. This is your mastoid process of the skull here. So you notice that projection is pretty prominent. That's a mastoid process. A ramus is an extension of bone. This is your ramus of the mandible, is this flat piece here. It goes from roughly there to roughly here. It encompasses all of this, is your ramus. Your sinus is, again, that air-filled space. So this is found within your frontal bone. You have this frontal sinus, which is a hole essentially, which makes your bones lighter. And then you have a spine. So this is the spine of the scapula coming here. It's that ridge-like projection is the spine of your scapula. So what is a process? Where would you find a ramus? What is a sinus? What do they do for us? What is a spine in terms of bones? And where would you find one? Your last couple terms. The first one is suture. Sutures are interlocking lines between two bones, holds bones together. Though you find sutures in the skull. You have a trochanter. I should have put tubercle above trochanter, but a trochanter is a very large process. You have two of them. One on your, you have two of them on each femur. So you have a greater trochanter of the femur. You also have a lesser trochanter. A tuberosity is a knob-like process larger than a tubercle. So you have tubercle, tuberosity, trochanter. They kind of expand, get bigger as you go. So you have a tibial tuberosity is kind of a rough spot. It's kind of a rough little process or projection that sticks out. Your tubercle is a knob-like process. And this is where you get the tubercle of the rib. And so we'll look at that here. And so your trochanter, ooh, I missed one. Sutures are first. So these lines here are called your sutures. You'll be able to name these, but they connect two bones to prevent things from going through. Your trochanter is this big projection here is called your greater trochanter. The one over here is called your lesser trochanter because it's lower. It's a big projection. A tuberosity is this little bump or this knob here that acts as a rough spot for a tendon and ligament attachment. And then your tubercle is a little bump on, such as your rib. You also have a tubercle on your humerus. But this is a little projection which allows, again, for attachment site for tendons and ligaments. Your last four questions. What is a suture? Where would you find a trochanter? And what is a tubercle? Where can you find one? And lastly, what is a tuberosity? Thank you for your time and attention today. We'll review these terms. You'll get to see them more as we work through the body. But for now, enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you next time.